Welcome back to the channel. It's January 12th, 2025. I am D-Bays, your humble host. That's talent on loan from Kolob. I am the king of the sons of Provo. I am the diddly whack Mac Mormon Daddy. It is never too late to tune into the Mormon News Roundup. We go live every Sunday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have not missed a Sunday in almost 3 years, and I don't plan on doing so. We have a big week in Mormon news, and I'm so glad you decided to join us. Let's jump right in here, and we're going to talk about episode 146. We're going to talk about American Primeval, and we're also going to talk about the dark days at BYU. Oh boy, this is a big article that hit from the Salt Lake Tribune. Peggy Fletcher Stack in rare form. We'll also talk about what is the church doing in the California wildfires. And also we'll talk a little bit about the Salt Lake temple updates, which are definitely hitting here. We're going to play a clip on that for you a little bit and bring you up to speed with what's happening with the Salt Lake temple, the church's flagship temple, but in my opinion, only the second most important temple in Mormonism behind the Washington, D.C. temple. We'll give you some official church news updates, and finally, as promised, American Primeval just hit on Netflix. It's going to be a wild ride. I'd like to welcome those people who are in the live chat. It's always great to see you out there. Thanks, Maven. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Songs of Our Own. Great to see you. Glad to have you on board. Now, we're going to kick this right off the bat here with the BYU professors afraid of a crackdown on Clark Gilbert's version of LDS Orthodoxy. This hit this last Monday in the Salt Lake Tribune. Now, for those of you who are not aware, BYU Brigham Young University has 3 campuses on Hawaii, has Idaho, it has Provo, it also has the Ensign College, formerly known as the BYU LDS Business College, and it also has the Pathways program. Clark Gilbert is the commissioner of the church education program, and he has been cracking down on those progressive or dissident BYU professors, and it's causing quite a bit of consternation. This is our number one article of the week. We're giving it to you right off the bat here, and I have a clip here which is going to tell you all about it in case you're not following it. This is big news. Let's see what we got here.
Some of the faculty that I talked to called it Clark Gilbert's black box. It says, you know, the form says you have to support church doctrine. You can't oppose church doctrine. Some of these things are not doctrine, and some of these things are open to interpretation, and it's frankly not clear what people did wrong. I'm writing about Brigham Young University and its efforts to have faculty all follow a particular set of behavioral standards that even go beyond the church's own standards.
I'm Elder Clark Gilbert, and I currently...
Most of these changes have tracked to the administration of Clark Gilbert, who is a General Authority 70 and the Commissioner of Education. He's a very powerful person.
Yes, indeed. He declined to be interviewed for this story. Not surprising at all. Most Mormon general authorities, he is a General Authority 70, which is a particular brand of Mormonism. They don't do interviews on candles. They light their candle and put it under a bushel, and they refuse to share that further light and knowledge that the Father was supposed to promise to send to us, but never did. He just lights it under a bushel and refuses to answer any questions from someone who might hold him accountable.
And it's a form that goes beyond the temple recommend. All faculty already had to have a temple recommend. This is an additional form, and it includes a promise to support the church's stance on marriage, family, and gender.
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt so much, but just by way of background, I worked either full-time or part-time for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for almost 24 years. So far from being just an idle curiosity, this particular segment runs deep to my core. Yes, back in 2022, the church instituted additional basically thought control or loyalty oaths for most BYU faculty members that went beyond what is called the ecclesiastical endorsement, meaning your normal temple recommend question, to ask you additional fealty questions with regards to church policy on LGBTQ issues. That's what Peggy is referencing here.
These standards go well beyond what is expected of members to get a temple recommend allowing them into the faith's temples. In the LDS Church, the most sacred places are temples. You go to your local ecclesiastical leaders, your local bishop, and answer a set of questions. Only members who have signed off on a certain set of behavioral and belief standards have access to the temples. Those are pretty strong requirements. So for
Yeah, so what Peggy is basically arguing here is already the bar is quite high to be a BYU faculty member. You can't just be a regular member in good standing. You have to be able to pass the temple recommend questions, and those have been updated by President Nelson. Actually, I think a couple of times. There's currently 19 questions, and they do change from time to time. And of course, what's difficult for BYU faculty members, really, or anyone else who works for the church for that matter, is you basically signed up for one set of questions that generally stay about the same. The temple recommend questions haven't differed that much in quite some time. There's some minor tweaks here or there about garments or other things, but they're pretty similar for the last few years. All of a sudden, in 2022, you're adding an additional layer of additional questions. And some faculty members are pushing back and said, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. And that's what's causing all of the issues there at BYU, among many other things. And as Bob here said, there's nothing but dark days at BYU, kind of the nature of the thing. You know, the sad fact of the matter here, Bob, is that BYU has the potential to be the shining city on a hill, as as Ronald Reagan said. It has the ability, as Jeff Holland said, to be the Harvard of the West. But if you institute regressive thought control and fealty oaths that go above and beyond even basic church behaviors and doctrines, that's when the dark days really start coming upon us.
the school or Clark Gilbert to require additional standards just it seems very extreme. For
Yes.
example, it extends to opposition to same-sex marriage, which the church itself says it's okay for members to believe in same-sex marriage and still be in good standing.
See, generally the temple recommend questions generally, but not completely, gauges a person's behaviors. And that's what it used to all be about. Can you toe the line? In other words, do you obey the law of chastity? Do you avoid drinking alcohol? Are you honest in your dealings with your fellow man? These are generally behavior oriented questions for faculty to answer. Now, we're not just asking questions about behavior, we're asking questions about a person's thoughts, not whether they've acted upon anything. Not have not have you personally solemnized a same-sex union, but are you merely mentally in favor of LGBTQ rights or equality or anything like that? It's a level of thought intrusion which is quite significant.
But staff and faculty at BYU cannot.
It is their opportunity to choose, not ours to compel.
Clark Gilbert, who became Commissioner of Education, spent a year interviewing faculty and then came up with some categories of faculty that he had noticed.
Yeah, so Clark Gilbert is very, very tight with, as we saw in that last picture, with Dallin Oaks, who is second in line in the Mormon Church. And he also is extremely tight with Jeff Holland, who was, pardon me, the former commissioner of the church education system. Clark Gilbert has also been the president of one of the BYU campuses, along with Jeff Holland. From all intents and purposes, I would say that Clark Gilbert's star is rising in Mormonism. He's only 56 years old, and I would not be surprised at all to see him in either the presidency of the 70, the presiding bishopric, or if there was another vacancy, the apostles. But yeah, he's really cracking down on his particular brand of Mormon orthodoxy. And as we saw in that last clip, it really comes from Dallin Oaks. We see them shoulder to shoulder. And a lot of people are saying that because President Nelson is quite old, that Dallin Oaks is really calling a lot of the shots, especially with regards to, we saw a few months ago, the transgender updates, which we know is one of Oaks's hobby horses. He's very regressive and very anti-gay. And if Clark Gilbert and him are in solidarity, that's where the dark days are coming from. And especially this really recalls back to Jeff Holland and his famous musket wildfire talk, where he used in what, in my opinion, is some very irresponsible language, using military metaphors to discuss the supposed defense of the proclamation of the family and the church's stance against same-sex marriage, which, by the way, the church has. This is the crazy part about all of this witch hunting and the dark days, is that the church endorsed same-sex marriage just a year ago with, what was it? I believe it was the Marriage for All Act, which gave a significant carve out to private institutions to allow people or institutions like BYU or churches to continue to discriminate against LGBTQ persons. But the church basically was instrumental in that compromise. So I mean, there's just so many layers into this, and there's just so much irony here. And as Deborah said, even if all the teachers quit because they didn't like their ethics or because they don't want to go along with the new BS, there would be others that would take their place. That is for sure. And what the Salt Lake Tribune article here, Deborah, points out is that a number of professors who didn't want these additional field TOs and didn't feel like that they could sign off on basically the anti-gay stuff that BYU is trotting out here, a lot of them end up leaving BYU. There's no doubt about this. Hey, Howie, welcome to the program. I prefer this program format. Certainly glad to have you on board here. Maven, also, it is nice to see you. That's great.
The highest being absolutely the most orthodox in bringing, quote, spirituality into the classroom, down to the lowest category, which he called the open foes, who apparently he believes have written or spoken out against church policies. And he would like to see those folks leave.
Yeah, and see, this is what the article also points out too. This is an absolutely tremendous piece of journalism here by the Salt Lake Tribune. Peggy Fletcher Stack, I listened to her podcast. We're going to listen to Mormon Land, where she discusses it. It took her months to research this article. No one on earth could write this article except for Peggy Fletcher Stack. She's the only one with the connections, and she's the only one with the know-how. She is the end boss of Mormon journalism, and it's really grateful. I'm really grateful for her incredible reporting in this. So, my hat's off to her for sure.
It was troubling to many faculty, because the church itself doesn't demand that members oppose same-sex marriage. So this seemed like an additional requirement for faculty, and it just seemed like an unnecessary intrusion into their personal beliefs.
Right. Yeah, that's the question here. Why do BYU faculty members have to have additional requirements? Why is a temple recommend insufficient to teach at BYU? Why does there have to be this additional layer? That's what everybody's asking. And it doesn't seem like anyone has a good answer, except for that basically that Clark Gilbert wants them to have it. And it's common, almost like one person is running all of BYU. Forget the board of trustees. It's all comes down to Gilbert, and he appears to be calling the shots.
So for a university, which the whole purpose is to explore the whole universe of ideas, to be shutting down an avenue of deep concern and social justice at this moment seems harsh. And it goes way beyond what members are expected to believe or do.
See, this is the issue here. Like I said, I was a former faculty member. The academic freedom at BYU to be able to speak your mind. Typically at other universities, you're going to achieve a tenured status. And a tenure means that generally, unless you really run afoul of a faculty code of conduct or do something very egregious or, commit a crime or something like that, that your job status is safe. That gives you the freedom to be able to either criticize the institution or even criticize, let's say you're at a state school, you can criticize the state governor or things like that without repercussion. This enables a university or a college, and I've taught at quite a few institutions of higher education. I taught at BYU. I taught at the University of Utah. I taught at Snow College. I taught at Salt Lake Community College. I taught at the University of Phoenix. I taught at Utah Valley State College, and eventually I taught at UVU. I taught at Grand Canyon University, Axia College, and that's just for starters. Okay, so I'm pretty familiar with the higher education scene. academic freedom is the cornerstone of a proper inquiry into your discipline. When you have this kind of wet blanket that's thrown over BYU where academic freedom is diminished, it really runs havoc to an institution's goal. BYU is supposed to be enter to serve, go forth to learn. But if you can't speak your mind, and if there are certain disciplines of inquiry that are off limits because they run counter to church doctrine or church teachings, that's a problem.
One of the things that gets people in trouble is speaking critically about the school or about any of these policies or about Clark Gilbert.
Yeah, nobody wants to speak out and be critical of Clark Gilbert because their job is on the line. See, at BYU, you don't get the same kind of tenured protections that you get at most other schools. You only have at BYU what is called a continuing status. That's kind of a fake tenure, and your position is never as clear as you want it to be, at least in other sister institutions. And that's a major problem. Mark, welcome to the program. He says BYU has dropped in its academic rankings from 115 to 79. Actually, I believe it is 79 to 115. So BYU is dropping in the rankings, and it's due to these type of issues right here. This is degrading or diminishing. A BYU diploma now is worth so much less than it was just a few years ago. And if this dark days continues, if this regressive attitude is continues to be perpetrated on campus, a BYU degree will be even less. See, this is the danger here, is that BYU is not going to be the Harvard of the West. BYU is going to be another Liberty University or another Oral Roberts University, or heaven forbid, another Bob Jones University. It's a troubling pattern here. Let's keep on going.
That retribution, those are not empty fears. That is real.
Yeah.
The feeling of secrecy and lack of transparency is also contributing to low morale and to fear. You don't know, what did you do to cause this to happen?
See, and that's the problem here, is that in the article, Peggy points out that there's a number of faculty members who unfortunately had to speak off of the record for fear of retribution. But what happened is that they would maybe wear a pin, a rainbow flag pin to class, or maybe they had some kind of an LGBTQ affirming poster on their door, or maybe on social media they posted something, a rainbow color, or they were at a rally. And then all of a sudden, a short time later, their study abroad was canceled, or they were passed over for a promotion, or whatever else. What the article doesn't talk about, and maybe this is a little conspiratorial, is that I think a lot of the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and I don't have anything necessarily solid to back this up, but I think a lot of it is focused internally on the BYUs and not necessarily on the members. I think they comb their social media profiles, and if anyone is expressing a desire or a sympathy with a cause that is not in line with Orthodox teachings as interpreted by Clark Gilbert, your job, your promotion, your your research can be called into question. There's just a culture of fear that permeates that institution from top to bottom. And it doesn't necessarily go to the student body, but it still can, especially if those students start having doubts. I have 2 degrees from Brigham Young University, 2 of them, okay? And like I said, I spent a lot of time on campus, worked full-time or part-time for the church for almost 24 years. Every single thing that Peggy Fletcher Stack here is saying rings true to me. I literally am feeling the spirit while I'm watching this clip.
Some of the faculty that I talked to called it Clark Gilbert's black box. The form says you have to support church doctrine. You can't oppose church doctrine. Some of these things are not doctrine, and some of these things are open to interpretation, and it's frankly not clear what people did wrong. You know, some of the people who didn't get hired, who went up the ladder, they were interviewed, they were put forward by their department, went to a general authority interview, which is required of all new hires, and then still didn't get hired. And some of those people desperately want to know what they did wrong because they still want to be hired there.
And also what Peggy points out in this particular in her article is that there seems to be a troubling pattern of not only interviewing potential professors at BYU, but taking into consideration their spouses. Your spouse has to come to an interview with you because we don't want to have any spouses at BYU who might be dissidents. I mean, bringing a spouse to an interview, like I said, I've taught at many education institutions, including BYU. I spent a half of my life in that particular sphere. No one asks you to bring your wife to an interview. If that is a common practice, that is really creepy and, quite frankly, very cult like.
Several of the people I spoke with speculate that it's harder for women to get through the process than women candidates. People I spoke with worry that this is leading the school to become more rigid, that some of the best and the brightest LDS faculty will not be applying to teach there. Many very good faculty could leave.
Yeah, and the patriarchy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints still holds true on the BYU campuses. I mean, it was a long time before BYU would even hire a woman to be an adjunct faculty member. They would allow women to be secretaries. That's no problem. You can have a low-level job, but a BYU faculty member, even adjuncts, it took them forever to be able to do that. And then I believe, I want to say in the Matt Harris series that BYU ran afoul of Title IX. I believe it was back in the 70s by not hiring enough women, and they were literally forced to hire more women's faculty. They do that kicking and screaming, and there's still a huge segment of people who won't say it openly, but active Latter-day Saints and professors at BYU who think that a woman's place is in the home. So I'm not surprised at all when Peggy says that women have an uphill slog at BYU. Not surprised at all. By the way, my mother also worked at BYU for over 20 years. So I know I know what I'm talking about. Unlike so many other aspects of this podcast where I'm just out in left field, I'm giving you God's own truth here, folks. Let's see here. They must continually keep faculty under their thumb. When your paycheck is on the line and you have a family, it can be scary with things like this. Absolutely, Deborah. You have no idea what it's like to not have clear communication as to what your expectations are, because the church continues to evolve on its LGBTQ policies. I mean, just go back to 2015. It was revealed by President Nelson, even though President Monson was still the prophet, that if your parents were gay, you couldn't join Jesus's church. And then 3 years later, it was reversed. The church stood for years, Proposition 8, for instance, back in 2008, against gay marriage, and then just last year came out in favor of a gay marriage bill. It's like you're bouncing back and forth as a faculty member, not knowing your current expectations and not knowing what's going to come down the pike next. What do I have to believe next? It's never about what's being authentic to you. And, it's never even about what you prayed to the Lord for as a BYU faculty member and feel comfortable with your personal revelation in your beliefs. It's always about obedience. And that's very regressive and very troubling.
Either forced out or just choosing to leave.
Yeah.
Which would be a tragedy for the school that's tried to be excellent and wants to be seen as excellent. But if it's
Yeah, as Maven said, I'm so glad I believed as a student. I can't imagine losing a testimony at BYU. See, students are generally on campus for just a couple of years. So, it takes oftentimes a while for a testimony to erode away. Now, there are some cases where people just kind of wake up and it's gone. Something traumatic happens, somebody dies or whatever it is. Maybe that's not the best example. But when you're a faculty member and you're going to be at an institution, not just for 2 years, 4 years, or whatever the case may be, a master's degree. My program was only a year and a half long. I did it on expedited. When you're a faculty member, testimonies can much more easily be lost and eroded in a 15, 20, 30-year career. That's where the rubber really starts hitting the road. Hey, Tony, welcome to the program. Spouse in attendance at interviews guarantees correct answers. The crazy thing about all of this is I kind of have a long episode here lined up for tonight, but that's okay. I've got a lot to say. The most amusing or ironic thing is that we found out that Mormon apostles' wives aren't there for the interviews, even though that particular job involves them to a high degree. They're expected to go around with their apostle husband and toe the line, yet they're not deeply involved with the interview. They're not there with President Hinckley when he was interviewing, I believe it was David Bednar, and Susan wasn't in the room, or others. I can't remember which apostle it is, but we found that out. And yet, your spouse is supposed to be there for your academic job. You're going to teach microbiology at BYU, and your spouse has nothing to do with your curriculum, is not expected to be at faculty meetings, yet she needs to be there. What the hell is wrong with this situation? It's not good. Songs of our own. If you think about it, BYU educators, especially history professors, have a long history of being excommunicated. The church has gone through many what we call, or what Benjamin Park calls, retrenchments at BYU. It started back in the 1910s, where BYU professors started to teach organic evolution. Well, that ran afoul of the current philosophies at the time in the church, which was that evolution was godless atheism, and those guys were kicked out. It was also ramped up in the 1960s under the 1950s under Ernest Wilkinson, from 1951 until 1970, when he ran an insane campaign against his own faculty members, trying to root out dissenters, with Harold B. Lee and Joseph Fielding Smith in his back pockets, backing him up and trying to find people who were not towing the line. We always have these periods of ebb and flow at BYU, and right now we're in a regressive time frame.
Its best and brightest faculty choose not to go there. It will definitely limit its accomplishments. Even since Clark Gilbert has been in place, the standing in U.S. News and World Reporter declined kind of dramatically.
Yeah. And the standings in the church at BYU will continue to decline if it decides to go down this road. And for all intents and purposes, what we learned from Jeff Holland in his Musket Fire talk speech, which is now required reading at BYU in the BYU Foundations class, that's a very important talk, because he was echoing Dallin Oakes's talk about towing the line on the church's interpretation of LGBTQ causes. And I just can't emphasize the importance of that enough. It's really, really an important talk. Now, I've got a couple of other people here that are going to weigh in on this as well. Hey, thanks so much for joining the program here, Bubba Babel. Thank you. I love your videos. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. Now, we have Ben Park here, who gives his own take about the dark days of BYU. Let's hear from him as well. He's a BYU graduate, and he usually gives really good takes, even if they are slightly corny, if I could put it that way. Oops. Let's go back there. Here we go. Some technical difficulty here.
Why are Mormon leaders cracking down on Brigham Young University faculty? My name is Dr. Benjamin E. Park. I'm a scholar of American religion and author of the book American Zion, A New History of Mormonism. And today, the Salt Lake Tribune published a very important and exhaustive story, Dark Days, Why So Many BYU Professors Fear Their Jobs and Their Future. I strongly recommend it, but I thought here on TikTok I would give brief background for why this current retrenchment period is both rooted in history, but also uniquely directed at our present moment. But first, some historical context. It's important to note that LDS leaders have always trained their eye on BYU, its faculty, and its students. This tension goes all the way back to, say, 1911, when it fired several professors who were teaching evolution. It continues in the 1960s and 1970s over disputes of socialism and communism during the Red Scare. And of course, it goes all the way to until today, when they are cracking down on BYU faculty who are sympathetic to LGBTQ causes. I spend quite a bit of time in my book, American Zion, on this guy, Franklin Harris, who was made president of BYU in the 1920s and 1930s, and tried to transform what had been a smaller academy into a larger accredited university that met academic standards. He hired professors with higher degrees from elite institutions, granted them broad freedom to teach and publish what they felt was necessary, and then received backlash from LDS authorities. In fact, I wrote both in my book and in an essay for the Salt Lake Tribune about how an address that LDS leader J. Reuben Clark delivered in 1938, titled The Charted Course, ended up laying the foundation for LDS retrenchment against academic learning that, to a large degree, still shapes LDS education today and the way they approach BYU. Now, it has been a nationwide trend that universities have become targets in the culture wars. Just think about all the partisan right-wing figures who attack academics for being quote unquote woke or for teaching quote unquote critical race theory. So it's not a surprise that that same tension is taking place within the Mormon context, though with extra layers of unique Mormon meaning. Perhaps the most visible example of this conflict between a community's conservative vision and a university practice is Apostle Jeffrey R. Holland's remark in 2021 when he urged LDS faculty to support the church's gender positions and saying we need to hear more musket fire discourse from the halls of BYU in opposing these secular onslaught against the traditional family. I've said a lot about that talk. Many of you heard about it, but it is just one moment of this broader culture war. It was that same year that Holland delivered his musket fire address that Clark Gilbert was appointed the Church Commissioner of Education, basically overseeing all the church's educational pursuits, including its Brigham Young University campuses in Provo, in Idaho, and Hawaii. But he pays particular attention to BYU. He came in with a background that was deeply skeptical of academic research. He had previously oversaw Deseret News and gutted their newsroom. And he has said several things in Deseret News editorials that show he is part of this culture war flank, attacking what he decries secularism's corrosions. And he has done this at BYU, taking full control over hiring, punishing faculty, calling out students who don't fit the typical mold. And the story that Peggy Fletcher Stack published in the Salt Lake Tribune brings receipts.
Yeah, just like Brady, welcome to the program. I think Ben is speaking truth here very, very well. I think his take, I really like his takes, even if, like I said, he's just a little corny, and this is the pot calling the kettle black here. But Brady, welcome to the program. She says, seems like they only want fully converted, that is brainwashed staff to keep the students in line. Absolutely. You've got to drink the Kool-Aid deep and strong and make sure that you don't check see if it's poisoned. Everyone hired is probably told to return and report if they hear any sinning going on. You know, there's a culture of fear. You never know who's going to turn you in. You don't. It's just like the Sneakers movie with Robert Redford. It says you won't know who to trust. You can't trust anyone at BYU in confidence. You can't give any doubts to anyone. You've got to put on a happy face. And if by chance you meet a frown, do not let it stay.
Apparently, Gilbert has been going around saying that BYU faculty can be fit into 4 camps: the faithful core, they that teach with the Holy Spirit and weave the church tenets as they understand them. There's even a dig there, as they understand them. These faculty, they're not on my level. The supportive center, they support the church, but are not as enthusiastic as church leaders as they ought to be, right? They are not producing the musket fire necessary. The secular first, they put truth from any source on equal footing with Latter-day Saint gospel. Disregard the fact that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young frequently taught that you should place all truth on equal footing with the Latter-day Saint gospel. And then, of course, the open foes. They write an article or take a public position contrary to the church. And most often, this is in cases of gender issues and LGBTQ belonging. He says that he wants to find a way to get rid of those in the latter camp. And I love this note that Peggy included. Gilbert did not respond to a specific question about how he would remove them, but it is chilling indeed. Now, the story includes testimonials from many faculty who have since had to leave BYU due to these shifting circumstances, many of whom, by the way, have queer children. So it makes sense why they don't feel they can fit in this environment that Clark Gilbert is establishing. It's important to note also that Peggy Fletcher Stack said that of the dozens and dozens of faculty she spoke to, none were willing to go on the record because they feared recrimination from Gilbert and others, showing that academic freedom is not something of a priority among Gilbert and those establishing this new order at BYU.
Not one faculty member would go on the record. Not one. What does that tell you? See, the thing about it is that you don't just serve Brigham Young University. You don't just serve the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You are beholden to your current ward bishop. If you have a disagreement with him, if your bishop doesn't think that you toe the line, your job is over. And let's not forget also that you have to answer to Clark Gilbert and his minders as well. There's so many masters that you have to serve at BYU, and none of those masters are anthropomorphic magic immortals named Jesus. We'll just put it that way.
Element that I feel is particularly troubling about Gilbert's reign is he's established this new ecclesiastical clearance office that's to approve all new hires at BYU. And I've heard of dozens of cases of departments who have voted on hiring a certain candidate, passing all the levels of approval, including the general authority level, only to be vetoed by Clark Gilbert's black box, never giving a reason why. But that's one way they are controlling who gets to teach at BYU.
And the other thing here, it's not just that you have to get through Clark Gilbert and you don't really know why you didn't make it onto the team. You got the vote from everyone from the bottom of the line to the top. It's that people who are let go, especially adjunct faculty members, sometimes are not given a reason whatsoever as to why they were terminated. But it just so happens to coincide with, well, their son or their daughter was gay and they went to a pride festival, or they posted something affirming to LGBTQ online. The level of Big Brother here is really stupendous. You can't possibly, listen to me, folks. You have no idea what it's like to work for an organization where you can't trust anyone, where you can't speak your mind, where you can't be yourself, where you can't be honest and ethical with your own bishop. Do you know how many BYU faculty members lie to their bishops or their stake presidents on a routine basis in order to keep their jobs, in order to make it so that they can feed their families, in order that they won't lose their health care and end up homeless on the street because they don't want to uphold some harmful policy or doctrine? There's a significant amount of people. I mean, I get chills when I am going through this. Listen, when this article came out at the beginning of the week, it just hit me like a thunderbolt, like a bolt of lightning. Honestly, I read it through 2 times straight through, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I tried to talk to my wife about it. She didn't want to hear about it because this is very important stuff to me, because I lived it. And one of the reasons, honestly, that I have started this podcast is when your mouth is forced shut by threat of not only eternal recrimination, but of you losing your job, there is a pent up amount of things that you want to say that you could never say while you were part of the Mormon Church, while you were part of the BYU cog. And those just come spilling out now that I no longer work for BYU. And I've talked about this before, that I want to my goal is to go out as the king of Mormon, ex-Mormon content. And I'm well on my way, by the way. I'm getting closer to 1,500 videos, and I'm not going to stop until I'm at the top of the ex-Mormon YouTube.
Now, because they knew this was coming, BYU had a response ready to go. So Deseret News published this editorial about why everything is rosy and great at BYU. One laughable part of this response is they say, well, look at how great the sports programs are. We just had a wonderful football season with massive coverage of our bowl game. The basketball team just signed the great player in the nation, as if those types of achievements are signals of virtue. But the tragic part of this response that actually embodies the problem going on is they quote a BYU football player who says he loves BYU. Good for him, right? I love BYU as a undergraduate student. He loved BYU because he could be unapologetically me. But that's the crux of the matter, because queer students can't be unapologetically themselves. Faculty who want to support their queer children can't be unapologetically themselves. Only people that can be unapologetically themselves are those who fit this narrow mold established by Clark Gilbert and others that fit in their worldview of culture wars of good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah, so the most amazing thing is here, he brings up one Deseret News editorial, which he just laughs off because these editorials that are run out of the Deseret News, they are not honest. They don't reflect the lived reality of anyone, and they're just a total joke. I'm going to bring one up here a little bit later as well, because the church understands that this is a very, very big article this week, and it tries to muster these absolutely pathetic responses through its media outlets that are truly laughable. And that's what Ben Park said, and I agree with him 100%. Tio, welcome to the program. Zealots and Pharisees run the church education system. You better believe that they do. Clark Gilbert doesn't give people correct, as Joseph Smith said, we were supposed to teach people correct principles and let them govern themselves. I believe that was in the King Follett discourse, if I'm not mistaken. No, we're not going to let people govern themselves. We're going to micromanage them, and we're going to use Orwellian tactics that are akin to 1984 levels of thought control that are highly disturbing. Maven says, I'll never get how much more people love sports than anything else. Look, Maven, I still watch the BYU sporting programs. What can I tell you? I'm a big sports fan. I don't know what it is. The Y chromosome, Maven, nothing I can do about it. It must be genetic. Songs of our own. Signals are virtue. Laugh out loud. Very clever indeed.
So I strongly recommend going to read Peggy Fletcher Stack's story in the Salt Lake Tribune, Dark Days, Why So Many BYU Professors Fear Their Jobs, Their Futures. If you don't have a subscription to Salt Lake Tribune, you can just subscribe for a few dollars to their Patreon and get all their Mormon coverage. It's really great. This is a story that hits me personally because I was a BYU student. I had a wonderful time because I had great friends and faculty who prepared me to be an academic. I also have many friends who teach at BYU and trying their best to both fit their standards of academia, as well as fulfill the mission of, being faithful Mormons as they understand it. And they are under attack by Clark Gilberts and others. Right. And this is just a sad moment of the cyclical crisis of crackdowns on BYU academics. And I wish it wasn't the case.
That's a tremendous take here. Ben Park does an excellent job here. I couldn't agree more with him. Very, very interesting stuff here. I'm going to bring you all kinds of good takes on this BYU particular article as well. Now, I don't have a guest host on, and I haven't done as much guest hosting as I normally do on this program because it's truly exhausting. It takes a lot of time to coordinate these type of things, but I'm still going to give you a very good episode tonight, which I am really looking forward to here. Next up here is Jana Reese. Now, she went on the Mormon Land podcast here, and this is a must listen as well because Peggy Fletcher Stack interviews both Ben Park and Jana Reese about this Dark Days at BYU. This is a fascinating listen, and I've got one highlight here for you from Jana Reese, who talks about these dark days, and she obviously knows Mormonism very well, written a number of books, very well respected PhD sociologist. Let me give you Jana Reese's take on Peggy Fletcher Stack's groundbreaking interview. This is about a 3-minute clip.
Well, I've been researching and writing a book about people who either leave the LDS church or who have experienced some kind of transition in their faith but choose to stay. And in the course of that research, I've talked to more than 100 individuals, including several who either work at BYU or for the church directly. And I would say that for them, the hardest aspect is that sense of feeling that they have to live a double life that they don't want to.
Yeah, I'm just going to hop in here real quick. When I worked for BYU in the church for so long, I didn't even have any social media presence. I didn't hop into politics. I didn't hop into any church criticism. I didn't do anything because I had to live a double life. Okay. You have to tell your employer one thing and you have to tell your bishop something else. It really grates on you when you can't be authentic to yourself. And quite frankly, that's what the entire encapsulation of Mormonism is all about. If you look at, for instance, Kevin Pearson, General Authority 70, he says that you are not you. You are someone else. Whoever it is that you think that you're supposed to be, no, God has a different idea about who you're supposed to be. Maybe you're supposed to be some Mormon prophet's polygamous wife. Maybe you're supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. Or maybe you're supposed to be a bishop. Whoever it is that you want to be, you have to subvert that because it's always doctrine over self.
Would like to show up as fully themselves in this environment that they care about enough to devote their working hours to it, as well as their Sunday and possibly evening hours to it. And so for them, they would much prefer a system where they could go to the bishop if they are having a question about their faith, as the religion might encourage them to do, and be able to avail themselves of that particular kind of ecclesiastical help and guidance. And they really can't, really.
Yeah, you absolutely can't go to your bishop when you work at BYU. If you have a faith crisis, what could your bishop possibly do for you? The only thing your bishop is going to do is take away your job. Okay, so how is it that you're incentivized to work something out if you have questions? This is the entire problem here. There's no way to, let's also say that you messed up and did something against church teachings and that you need to repent. Are you incentivized to talk to your bishop about that? Heavens no. If you tell him, you're going to lose your healthcare insurance. Your kids are going to go homeless. Do you see the perverse setup that we have here? And there's just, what's the solution? And unfortunately, instead of making things better, Clark Gilbert is coming in and making things worse. Where will it end? When will the witch hunts end? When will it all stop?
Realistically.
So for my story, I interviewed dozens of current faculty, yet none of them would go on the record out of concerns for fear of retribution. Have either of you seen this fear on campus? Do you think it is real?
Yes, I would say it's real.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you did so much due diligence in working on the story, I think for quite a long time.
Yeah,
right?
many months. Yes.
Yeah, for months and months. And that people who were still teaching at BYU and hadn't already left for some other place, were just not willing to have their names used in the story, tells us a lot about the environment and the fear of reprisal at BYU.
It absolutely does. It's incredibly telling that no one will go on the record for this, except for former BYU professors who left the university because of their conscience, and now they work at someplace else. It's a extremely troubling article here. We know that BYU, which is near and dear to my heart, listen, I have such a love for Happy Valley. Whenever I'm on BYU campus, that feels like home to me, and it always will. But this troubling turn, when will it all end? When will the regressive attitude end? And if you look at Clark Gilbert and Jeff Holland, who are some of the biggest movers and shakers on BYU, it's going to get worse before it gets any better. And that's the troubling aspect. Now, obviously, there's been a number of podcasts who have covered this week. So I'm going to give you a couple more takes here, starting with Mormon Stories, who definitely covered it, probably better than I did. But what can I tell you? They have a budget of a couple $1 million. And I have a budget of, about 2 bits. Oops. Let me see here.
Some of the
that link did not work.
It used to be that prophets, seers, and revelators were sort of noted or characterized as being proud to stand for truth and to speak up and to raise their voice. Why is it that modern day Mormon church leaders, general authorities, apostles, prophets, seers, and revelators are afraid of or embarrassed to speak to the press? You would think that they wouldn't be afraid or embarrassed to speak to the press and to stand for truth. And yet that's what Clark Gilbert is choosing to do here. And he's following, frankly, the lead of modern day Mormon prophets, seers, and revelators like Elder Holland and Elder Oaks that are basically afraid any longer to speak to the press. That hasn't always been true. When I was growing up in the church, even as I was a young adult, Gordon B. Hinckley would go on 60 Minutes. He would go on Larry King Live. He would grant press interviews. And ever since around 2008, the Mitt Romney campaigns, in the internet age, when reporters and the news media started becoming more aware of Mormon church teachings and policies and practices, they started asking tougher questions. And, Mormon church leaders just started cowering and being afraid to speak to the press and to the public. So that's telling.
Where is Clark Gilbert? He's abdicated his leadership responsibilities by not engaging with a very important article. I can only assume that he is afraid or that he has no good answers. Either way, it's embarrassing. As Bob said here, no, church employees can't get help when they need it. They can't get help for repentance and they can't get help for doubts. Therefore, where will they turn? They will leave the universities. And he said that being a church employee is the biggest cause of excommunication. I don't know about the biggest, but it certainly is a cause for excommunication. And I'm
going to just say right now,
and that is an absolutely, that's a demonstrable fact. Sorry, I have a couple technical difficulties. Here is that second clip here from Mormon Stories and John DeLynn. Dark days, new rules have BYU professors running scared. Clark Gilbert, the church's education commissioner, is determined to have faculty members who support the faith's teachings, or at least how his office interprets those teachings.
Now, this is one of the most disturbing things I read in the entire article. The article says previously spouses were invited to accompany a prospective hire. That now has become required. When you, as a possible prospective BYU faculty member, you are required to bring your spouse to a job interview, but it even gets worse. Some lay leaders have threatened to withhold candidate or continuing faculty members' ecclesiastical endorsement if their spouses stop attending church. If you want to be a professor for BYU, you can't drink tea, you can't drink coffee, you can't support same-sex marriage, you probably can't speak openly about being a Democrat or a liberal, you can't disagree with racist or sexist or homophobic things that the church is saying or has said, you can't have looked at pornography once in the past year, and your spouse has to be fully active and faithful in the Mormon church, and you have to pay 10% of your income to the church, etc. We're getting ridiculous here. Why in the world should a high caliber academic or scholar, why should they be punished to either not be allowed to be hired at BYU or to be feared that they'll be fired if their spouse is no longer believing and or attending the Mormon church? I think that's abusive. I think that's horrific.
That is one hell of a take. Nice work there, John. I guess that's why he's a mega big time podcaster, and I am just sealess fodder because he can put it out there so well. Hey, Uprock Hunter, welcome to the program. He says, I wasn't hired for a position back in the 90s because I wasn't married. See, there's just so many layers of being a good faculty member, a quote unquote good faculty member. Now, I have been running polls in the background on this particular podcast. I forgot to mention them. So I asked, are these dark days for BYU? And 96% of you said yes. So it seems like they really are dark days. A couple of other polls that I put out there, I said, is it ethical to ask BYU professors to swear allegiance to the LDS Church's anti-gay policies? 81% of you said no, 12% of you said yes, and 6% of you said depends. Now, what I've seen from the social media this week is people who kick back at this and say, well, the church has the legal right to ask any of its professors to do or say almost anything as long as it's in accordance with church teachings. And there's no dispute on that. The church has the ability to run the BYU campuses almost entirely in accordance with its own wills. Obviously, it can't engage in, Title IX violations or, ban people for interracial marriage. But it's just so sad to see. So sad, honestly, just very, very sad about it. Now, a couple of other things here. As Uprock Hunter said, instead, they hired a married woman who had kids. Yeah, that's a common sentiment. Now, we already saw from Ben Park that the church released a couple of what are, in my opinion, very pathetic takes this week to try to at least give some kind of a response instead of Clark Gilbert showing true leadership. what we had here is a couple of very bad op-eds, and Ben Park already talked about one of them. And here's another one here: perspective, why I returned to teach at BYU. Being able to expand my faith alongside academic questions and classroom teaching has been nothing less than life-changing. If you click on this article here and read through it, you'll see that Miss Shima Baugman, I hope I'm saying that right. I apologize for that. She's a lawyer who once taught at BYU. Then she left to go to the University of Utah. And then lo and behold, she came back to BYU. And she's going to talk about how everything is copacetic. Everything's great. There's no issues. Everything's wonderful. I love BYU, and it's such a great institution. It's got a great sports program. Look at this. It's got a great sports program. This is that other one that was talked about. Football, faculty, and faith. Why I'm excited about BYU's future. And none of this deals with the 600 or 800-pound elephant in the room. None of it deals directly with it. Church leaders, the people who are on the board of trustees, won't deal with it. Clark Gilbert won't deal with it. None of the BYU professors will go on the record on it. Instead, we get these slick propaganda pieces that are released in the Deseret News. This is going to do nothing to stop these dark days from happening at BYU, from getting darker and darker. And a song says, is discrimination against LGBTQ people a Title IX violation? Listen, songs, this is what a number of BYU students over the years have sued the church in Title IX, saying that we have been discriminated against. We can't hold hands. We can't engage in romantic relationships. And they have consistently lost in the courts. And that was before the Marriage for All Act that the church helped negotiate through Congress and sent representatives to get that thing signed. And that particular law gives significant carve-outs to private institutions and churches to allow them to continue the anti-LGBTQ war. So the answer is that BYU is doing the legal thing that it is allowed to do, thanks to our mostly right-wing Republican Congress. Until the appetite in this country changes towards gay and trans people, that we do the same thing that we did with interracial marriage. Let's back it up a little bit. Bob Jones University back, I want to say it was in the late 70s, early 80s, which is a similarly religiously themed university, refused to allow interracial marriage on campus. And this was after Lovings, which was the case that was here in my home state of Virginia, in which the Supreme Court said that no one can ban interracial marriage. None of the states can. It's a legal law of the land. Well, Bob Jones said, no, we're not going to admit anyone onto our university that is interracial, that is an interracial marriage. Or if you do get married and it's interracial, then you will be discharged from the university. Well, they eventually lost their tax exempt status. They had to give up on that. And then they finally got it back. And that's because it's just because right now there is the appetite, especially in the right wing in our country, that allows people to discriminate against gay people. We have to have a societal change that is going to be seismic in order to redo these laws that says that no, if you take any federal funding from the federal government, which BYU does, it takes hundreds of millions of dollars a year in Pell Grants, in other finances. If you take any federal government dollars, you can't discriminate against gay people. Until that happens, until there's a groundswell, until we have the people coming out and voting and putting in people in Congress who are going to enact laws that are going to uphold gay persons' rights, BYU can continue to do exactly what it's doing now. So that's the troubling aspect of all of it. Brittany, I can imagine what they talk about after the interview. He was a great candidate, but his wife wore pants to the interview. Oh my gosh, that is sick. That is absolutely sick. Let's see here. I remember learning about Bob Jones University. Yeah, that's right. BYU eventually will go the way of Bob Jones University. It's going to take years, but eventually the tides will turn, and eventually people are not going to put up with subsidizing universities that are so regressive like BYU is. And what Jeff Holland said is that eventually he knows the writing on the wall. He's read a few books. He's not a dodo. He went to a pretty good school. He knows that eventually not only accreditation will be on the line for BYU, but professional affiliations will. And eventually BYU is going to come to a crossroads. I mean, it already has in some of its speech and pathology departments, for instance, where the BYU students and the faculty wouldn't teach the students about transgender voice recognition or changing your voice when you identify as a different gender. Well, they started to run afoul of accreditation. So what we'll see is individual departments at BYU will start to lose accreditation, and then the regional accreditation of BYU could be called into question, and eventually the tax exempt status of BYU will come into issue. This is not going to happen anytime in the near future. Unfortunately, this is going to take 20 or 30 years before it eventually gets rectified. But the big question is, what will BYU do at that time? Because by then, the church will be $1 trillion organization, and the couple $100 million that it gets every year from the federal government, it won't need that anymore. So BYU will eventually not take any federal funds in at all, and will continue its war on its LGBTQ students. And we can look at who is in line to be the prophet. And it's definitely not going to change under Elder Oaks when he becomes the chairman of the board of trustees of BYU. The only hope is for Uchtdorf. But the problem is his window for his prophethood is going to be short because he's already 84 years old. And we've looked at David Bednar as well. Look to David Bednar because he is the only hope for the church. And if you look at David Bednar's rhetoric, it is not good around LGBTQ issues. He is going to toe the line on that, which means we have to wait all the way until after that before we get some kind of a resolution. These are dark days at BYU. It is not looking good. Debbie, welcome to the program. I appreciate you coming on here. And Deep Diver, thanks so much for coming. I appreciate you coming onto the program. It's nice to see you all here. It's great to have you on the live chat. Now I'm not only going to give you the critical takes here, but let's take a look at some of the more faithful takes here. One of my favorite sweet spirits out there, Jasmine Rappley from Scripture Central. She's going to take a crack at BYU too. Let's see what she has to say about these dark times. Oops.
Fact about Brigham Young University. While this university, which is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is right-leaning, according to this study, it is the most politically balanced university in Utah, and it's in the top 16% for most politically diverse elite universities in America. 32% of the student body identify as liberal, 20% as moderate, and 48% as conservative. But compare this to Ivy League schools where 60 to 76% of the student body identify as liberal. Or compare that to a place like Hillsdale College in Michigan, which leans heavily conservative. Higher education tends to skew liberal, and if you're not careful, that can create blind spots and echo chambers. Of course, BYU has blind spots and biases too. It has an overtly religious mission. But personally, I'm grateful that while attending BYU, I had exposure to a wide variety of worldviews I couldn't get at other universities. I had faithful, mission-aligned professors that pushed me to challenge my own assumptions and perspectives, but also to critically evaluate the assumptions and ideologies of secular academia. So while you can find an education that caters to a secular worldview anywhere, some of the best and brightest are choosing to come to Brigham Young University to gain an ideologically balanced education that's grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what do you think about BYU's ideological diversity? Let me know in the comments. People are shocked when I share this.
Thanks, Jasmine. Really appreciate it. She always has such a cheerful demeanor. What can I tell you? But this is basically her response to the Dark Days article. Notice she doesn't reference it at all directly, but it's obliquely. She says that while she was at BYU, faithful professors upheld the gospel message. That's her signal that she wants these, as we saw from the 4 aspects of Clark Gilbert's war, the open foes. That's Jasmine signaling here. You have to read the tea leaves with Jasmine that she's for this regressive or retrenchment type attitude. And that is very common here. You have a lot of people saying, especially people like Greg from Quick Media or other faithful Latter-day Saints who say, we need to get these progressives out of BYU. We need people who toe the line and uphold the gospel of Jesus Christ as interpreted by Clark Gilbert. Rebecca, hey, it's so nice to see you. BYU as a liberal college is liberal, as in some more left-leaning on the far right. Interesting thought there. Very interesting here. Let's keep going here. That's basically it for the BYU section here. I spent an hour on it. I could spend an entire lifetime on it. My final thoughts here is, what is the end state here? And as I alluded to earlier, I don't see an end state here as long as Clark Gilbert continues this. What you would have to have happen in order for something to change is you'd really need to have a groundswell of faithful Latter-day Saints who are petitioning and getting up in arms and throwing demonstrations. And what we saw across this week, what we didn't see that. We saw some progressive people saying this is troubling times, but the vast majority of Latter-day Saints, they don't want to see a gay agenda at BYU. They want to send their kids there and not have to worry about the woke agenda of BYU professors. They don't want to have their kids exposed to queer theory, and they don't want to have anybody, talk about, the lived reality of transgender individuals. They want people to uphold the proclamation to the family and also the handbook that interprets that proclamation as saying that there are only two divinely ordained genders, male and female. There are no mismatches. So I just see troubling signs ahead here for BYU as the quality of education will slip because BYU the most qualified faculty members don't want to go to BYU because they know the level of thought control and big brotherism that is on campus. And the best students will also not want to go to BYU. The percentage of people or the actual physical number of applicants to BYU continues to slightly decline year in and year out, even though the church continues to expand. Uprock Hunter, indoctrinate their children even more at BYU. Absolutely. They want those kids on the covenant path. And any of these woke BYU professors, they don't have a stomach for it. So I don't see much changing here. Okay, a couple of other articles here. We've got to get you out of here. I don't want to spend too much time here. We had the troubling fires there in California. Absolutely horrific, very much apocalyptical here. I've been following this very carefully here. What does this have to do? Excuse me. What does this have to do with Mormonism? Well, I saw this on Facebook and it definitely caught my eye here. Let's pray for our Los Angeles temples, brothers and sisters. Folks, I've got a pretty big problem with this because, temples, they have insurance, okay? They can be rebuilt. I've never seen a demonstration of any prayer do anything, but if you were going to offer a prayer, how about we pray for the peoples whose lives are at stake here? I believe that we have a 10 or even 15 people who have passed away from these fires. Instead, we're going to pray for a quasi-Masonic multi-million-dollar castle where people do warmed over rituals for Adolf Hitler, Anne Frank, and Vlad the Impaler. I don't think so. Okay. The church has more money than God. And in fact, somebody was joking around this week that the church has more money, not only than God, it has more money than the devil. It can afford to build a new temple, which, by the way, is perfectly fine. Uprock Hunter, pray for the building and to hell with the people. See, that's the irony here. Why are we praying for a building? By the way, temples, there's been no demonstration whatsoever that anything that takes place in a temple has an eternal efficacy. They are therefore a massive waste of time. Why would you want to worry about it? I can't possibly fathom. Britt, thank you for the correction. CNN says 24 dead so far. Thank you for keeping me up to date. And people have been wondering here very rightly what the church has been doing with these particular fires. And I do have an update for you. What is the Mormon church doing with these horrific fires? Well, once again, we have to take the church's word for it, which is obviously obviously troubling. But let's see what it has. Let's bring this up here. Rebecca Biblioteca definitely posts a lot of great news updates here. So let's see what she said. LDS Church distributes aid and opens its buildings to those impacted by LA fires. The LDS Church has sent aid to the LA fire victims and opened its chapels to evacuees. Oh, I forgot. I had a snarky comment to Rebecca about that. I said, will there be signs out front of these church buildings telling people that gay marriage is a sin, kind of like Prop 8? When I had Rob, who's a licensed therapist on the program a couple of months ago, he runs a very popular YouTube channel and he lives in California. He said that the church in California has burnt so many bridges with its Proposition 8 that it's tough it's so tough now for the church to really gain traction in California, which is why California is one of the most areas in the entire world where Mormonism is rapidly dying faster than any other place on earth. But apparently the church is doing something. Let's see exactly what they're doing. If you click on the link here, it says LDS Church distributes aid and opens its building. Utah-based faith updates the status of its members and its missionaries here. So what are they doing? Well, all missionaries are safe and accounted for. Local leaders are appreciating the outpouring of support and willingness to volunteer. So, with so many, the relief said, until this is needed, those who wish to help can donate to the church's humanitarian efforts or offer volunteer support through local organizations. And Elder Mark Bragg, who is the General Authority 70 of that, says, our hearts go out to all affected fires that continue to cause destruction in Southern California. He's president of the FACE North America West area. And see, this is the issue here, is when you donate to the church, how do you know that anything is going to happen good with your donation? I know this is one of my hobby horses, but I can't help but mention it again because the church is not externally audited, like the Red Cross is, for instance, or like the Community of Christ is, for instance, or so many Catholic dioceses. When you make a donation to a charity that is externally audited, you can have a high degree of confidence that your donation is being used for its intended purpose or not. Just depends. That's what an external audit is. It'll tell you how much is being held for overhead, how much is being spent on marketing, how much of it is being spent for this, that, or the other. The Community of Christ, it literally tells you down to the dollar how much they spend on landscaping for their chapels. I mean, it's exhaustive. You don't have that with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we have Mark Bragg soliciting donations. How do I know my donation will be used for anything good? The answer is you don't. Therefore, it is not ethical to waste a donation to give to the Mormon Church when you don't have confirmation or a reasonable assurance that that money will be used to alleviate human suffering or help people in the California fire. That would be a tragic waste of a donation. You should donate it to an organization where you do have confidence that will be used to help people who are in dire suffering. Now, I can tell you this for a simple fact. If I had, just like Russell Nelson is the corporation soul of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's SOLE. He's one of the richest men on the planet, worth approximately $300 billion. The Widows Might Report just released their year-in update as to the church's total valuation as to the end of last year. They just released that a few days ago, and they pegged the church at $296 billion. Well, it's been another week, so the church is right around $305 billion. If I had sole control over that, you would feel my ability to change this planet in profound ways. I would unleash help, the likes of which have never been seen before, and it would be demonstrable, and it would be externally audited, and it would be incredible. What we don't see is the Mormon Church following suit. Now, I want to catch up with a couple of couple of comments here. Rich LDS families who shelter their rich kids want an Orthodox-centered education. They sure do. That's definitely there. Caitlin, welcome to the program. Great to see you. Hey, Rio, thanks for dropping by. It's always nice when you're here. And as Britt said here, the more that I read from you, Britt, the more that I like you. I may have found my spirit animal with Britt. She says, how do we know our donation will be used at all? That's the point. How do we know? Now, listen, okay, the church it's called the Caring for Those in Need report, which was released at the end of every year. We haven't gotten it for 2024 yet, but it should be out. It should be out shortly here in the next month or two. If you go back and look at 2023, the church claimed $1.4 billion in humanitarian giving. I am willing to give the church about 150 million or maybe even 200 million based on what we know that the church does. I think it's evident, and I think we can give the church that much amount of humanitarian giving. How do we get from the 200 million that I think that we can definitely say that the church does to the 1.4 billion? How do we close the gap? The Caring for Those in Need report does nothing. It is propaganda. There are no receipts. There are no external audits. If you want to receive credit for helping the California fire or for any other humanitarian donation, you must provide receipts. Currently, the Mormon Church does not do so. Therefore, they don't get credit for their alleged humanitarian actions. I see people in the Facebook posts who continue to post when the church made the update saying that we're helping out with the fire, we're opening up this or that, and they say, this burns, I'm sorry, that was a bad pun. This brings my testimony. Look, this is what's happening with our tithing. And it's like, How can you just take the church's claims here on face value, knowing the history of Mormon church lying specifically about its finances? How can you just sit there and say, whatever they tell me, I accept? That's not reasonable. That's not rational. Okay, let's see here. Howie, Charity Navigator only rates my steak 2 out of 4 stars. You know what? I'm not familiar with that Charity Navigator. I'm gonna have to read up on that. Okay, so that's the California wildfires there. A couple of other articles here that are going to take us out of here. And the church is getting very close here to remodeling and finishing up the Salt Lake City temple there. Vertical coring completed, Salt Lake Temple renovation milestone. Let's see what's going on with the church's flagship temple.
It's an engineering marvel.
For the past 3 years, they live life 150 feet in the air, 5 feet at a time.
We're just inching away here.
Working on the longest single activity of the Salt Lake Temple renovation project to date.
I've spent probably thousands of hours sitting behind this control panel at this point.
They are drillers and machinists, hundreds of miles away from home, laboring to make a safer Salt Lake Temple for future generations.
I feel honored to have my company and my crew as part of this project.
Although fulfilling, this crew will tell you, to a person, it's the toughest project of their careers.
There's so many challenges, but little by little, we overcame those challenges, and it developed to a point where no matter what the building throws at us, we're prepared.
The task, drilling vertical holes down through historic exterior stone walls.
That are actually being drilled from the top of the spires all the way down, right in between these jack and bore casings.
Like threading a needle, to be sure. A precision process called vertical coring uses hollow diamond-edged drill bits to core out the temple's granite-like stone.
This involved 2.5 miles of vertical coring through the structural walls of the historic temple. And that core comes all the way down, past the historic foundation, past the girders, down to about isolator level.
It's an integral phase of constructing the base isolation system, designed to preserve the temple in earthquakes. The corners of each of the towers and walls of the temple required these vertical holes. 46 holes had an average length of 150 feet deep that demanded undeviating accuracy.
This had to be done at ultra precision within 10 millimeters from the start point to the end point.
But the coring crew kept it to 8 millimeters. That's less than 3/8 of an inch leeway from top to bottom. The purpose, so post-tension cables like these can attach to the reinforced steel roof and towers at the top and to the newly constructed footings and transfer beams below.
The accuracy of these holes has to be very precise due to the requirements of the tension cables that will go in the holes.
The bundle of cables in each of the 46 holes are then pulled to a tension of 500,000 pounds.
When we activate those cables and pull them to their target load, they'll essentially sandwich the structure and provide a structural rigidity.
But getting there, a careful, methodical process requiring crucial equipment custom made for the Salt Lake Temple.
There's pretty much nothing off the shelf up here.
Like these bearing stabilizers that keep the coring process in alignment.
This doesn't exist in any other context and is not typically used in conventional coring.
Additionally, 4 specially modified and custom designed drills have populated the temple towers throughout the 3-year duration.
Its main function is to spin this drill string, which is essentially a series of heavy-duty pipes that run continuously down to the bottom of the hole.
The drills propel a downward thrust of 16,000 pounds to what is called a drill string. The string is comprised of a diamond-edged drill bit threaded to 5-foot sectioned hollowed rods, lengths critical in keeping the drill string on course.
We've learned is that within 5 feet, it will not deviate outside of our boundary.
The coring crew anticipated working with solid stone, but got an unwelcome surprise.
We thought we would be drilling pristine square blocks, and what we found was that we were drilling it, and sometimes in rubble.
Those voids in the walls can make the bit veer off course if not for vigilance and decisive action.
To drill perfectly straight, I've got to keep a close eye on probably a half dozen different parameters.
If the alignment deviates off center, approaching 8 millimeter, we have special tooling that makes it where we can steer the bit back to the center line.
Coring requires water.
You can't be flooding the walls and having water and slurry infiltrating into the interior walls.
A low-flow water system, developed especially for the temple, alleviated that problem. The waste slurry of stone dust and water is removed through an innovative vacuum and filter system that recycles the water.
We have a hose that is connected to the drill string that puts the inside of the string under a vacuum in order to recover slurry from the bottom of the hole.
It's a non-stop operation that demands another first on top of the temple, a fully equipped machine shop. Leaving an indelible contribution.
Oh, why didn't Brigham Young have a revelation about these particular ones? That's a good question here. Lunacy, all the money spent on the Salt Lake Temple renovation. Can you imagine how much the companies are making? That's the question here, folks. I do have a legitimate question here for you. How much do you think that the church has spent on this renovation? Remember, this renovation began over 4 years ago. It began in January of 2020. So I can only assume that the church is spending really $1 million or $2 million a month. I mean, this crews here are absolutely going gangbusters. I mean, they have a lot of people working on this. I would not be surprised at all if this renovation cost $100 million. That's my figure, and I'm going to stand by it. So I wonder out there. Oh, sorry. People are telling me I have no sound. I can hear you now. Sorry. Yeah. Bush League stuff out there. One of the funniest things that somebody posted out there that was on ex-Mormon Reddit here, which is this row of outhouses hovering above the Salt Lake Temple. Gave me a chuckle last week. How do you like those outhouses there, folks? You see those? Holy porta potties. You know, what a view. The highest ordinance in Mormonism is taking a crap on the temple. Oh, boy. That's ex-Mormon. It will definitely... achievement unlocked, crap above the temple, the smelliest of smellies. Oh man, ex-Mormons, boy, they really, the holy of holies joke is in here somewhere. I have a joke, but it's too good to share. Holy crap. I'm not going to say the S word. I'm too I'm too much of a wuss. Okay, now we also have a couple of other clips here that I want to show to you as well that are official church clips here. The church releases church news clips every single day. Let's watch a couple of those as well.
In church news today, this Friday, January 10th, as fires burn in Southern California, the church is mobilizing resources and looking for how to help. The area president, Elder Mark A. Bragg, grew up there. His statement said, "Our hearts go out to all affected." Primaries around the world are invited to organize service activities beginning in 2025. The primary general presidency says children have a legacy of serving other children. Professional golfer Cecile Lundgren says prayer and temple worship have helped her in her career. She serves with the young women in Norway and tries to use her experience for good. Learn more about these and other.
Okay, there's number one down. Let's go to number two.
In church news today, this Thursday, January 9th, Ensign College President Bruce C. Cush held the first campus devotional of the new year. He invited students to have their very own sacred grove experience by the power of the Holy Ghost. Apostles and general officers, university presidents and mission leaders, a football coach, and scholars are scheduled to speak at church institutions of higher learning this semester. See the list at thechurchnews.com. The Roots Tech 2025 full class schedule is now available for the Family History Conference in March. Online and in-person participants can now use the scheduling tool to explore classes and create personal watch lists. Learn more about these and other stories from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at thechurchnews.com or on the Church News app.
You know, I had Peter Bleakley on the program, and he said that he couldn't believe that the Mormon Church gutted the Vatican of Mormonism. He said that they would never do something like that over in Europe. Ancient cathedrals in Europe, you know, he's from Great Britain, they're considered sacred. I was just over in Great Britain for my brother's marriage here. I guess it was a year ago or so. They would never gut a cathedral to make it better. You know, Russell Nelson has done the absolutely unthinkable. And somebody is saying that they think that the church spent $2 billion on this renovation. That seems far too high. You could build the Salt Lake Temple from the ground up for probably between $175 million and $225 million, based on the best available estimates from the Widow's Mite. So a renovation, I would assume, would cost less than that amount. That's why I am sticking with my $100 million figure. I definitely could be wrong. There's no doubt about that. A couple of other official church clips here to get us going here.
In church news today, this Wednesday, January 8th, the BYU football team not only achieved success on the field in 2024, team members also mentored others globally and showed kindness towards opposing teams. In several ways, the team exemplified church values and the university's mission. This week's episode of the Church News podcast features the young men and young women general presidency counselors. They talk about the life-changing impact of For the Strength of Youth Conferences, or FSY. A church-supported garden in Alberta, Canada, is providing 16,000 pounds of fresh produce each year. The produce goes to the food bank to help those in need. Learn more about these and other stories from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at thechurchnews.com or on the Church News app.
Welcome to the Welcome to the program, Bruce. Nice to see you. Welcome to haters. No issues there. Let's keep this truck going here. Now, our next article here is from the American Primeval. I'm very interested in this. Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to watch it yet. What can I tell you? I'm really bummed out that I haven't watched it yet. What I really wanted to do was a watch party on it, and I know exactly how to do that without running afoul of the YouTube copyrights. But I kind of chickened out and I didn't do that. But I think it would have been really fun to do a watch party. Maybe I'll still do one in the future. Hard to say. I know how to get around the YouTube copyright issues. Ever since I got that copyright strike, I figured that out. But what can I tell you? Let's watch this particular trailer here. For those of you out there who have watched the American Primeval, be very interested to see what you have to say about that. In fact, our very first poll of tonight's program was talking about whether you'd seen it or not. In fact, I asked, did you see American Primeval yet? 61% of you said no, and 38% of you said yes. So it looks like I am in good company. Not all of you have seen it. So let's see what's going on with it. Wow, that looks really, really good. What can I tell you? I like the look of that. That's actually the first time that I've seen that. I queued that up and I didn't look at it in advance. That looked absolutely fascinating. Looking forward to seeing that. I gotta catch up on that. Let's see here. Britt says she just finished watching this series. No spoilers, but I guess you can give us your opinion. I'd appreciate that. Olivia, I served my mission in the area where the I assume you mean the Fanchers were from. That's the Arkansas. Oh, you must have served your mission in Arkansas, I assume. I used to live there myself, by the way. Very interesting time here. Watching it for the second time simultaneously on episode 2 now. Yes, I'm a little bit behind the game here. Very nice. Okay, let's get a couple of other commentaries on American Primeval from our favorite LDS apologist, Jasmine. Let's see what she has to say about American Primeval.
The Mormon militia depicted in the new Netflix show American Primeval is insane for all the wrong reasons. This gritty historical fiction of the old American West features members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as Mormons, as the villains. Yet even one of the show's historical consultants admitted it is definitely not an accurate history of anything. So here's what it gets wrong about Latter-day Saint history.
How did I actually haven't watched this clip either. I didn't prepare very well for today's episode. How did I know that Jasmine was going to say they got everything wrong? I literally could write her review for it. She's so predictable. Bless her heart.
First, the show has a Mormon militia known as the Nauvoo Legion riding in with hoods to destroy an innocent pioneer company. Then it eliminates an entire regiment of U.S. federal troops. And then an entire Shoshone village just to cover their tracks. It is wild. In reality, the Nauvoo Legion never attacked a wagon train in Fort Bridger. They never engaged in direct battle or combat with the U.S. federal troops during the Utah War. And they never destroyed a Shoshone village to cover their tracks of that first crime. All of these plot elements paint Latter-day Saints as a radical and zealously hostile religious group, yet all of these plot points are completely fictional. Some of the show's characters are based on real people, such as Brigham Young, Bill Hickman, and Jim Bridger. Yet again, though, there's more fiction than fact here, such as in the depiction of Brigham Young being this ruthless and murderous empire builder, which is simply not supported by the documents we have of his life. Now, to be clear, there are examples in Latter-day Saint history where they were the aggressors, such as at the Mountain Meadows Massacre or the Black Hawk War, and I think this show is trying to make allusion to those events. These events are complex and horrifying, and I think they deserve careful study and discussion. But the way that this show exaggerates and conflates multiple different events into a single plot just to ramp up the violence is unrealistic, and I think can perpetuate harmful stereotypes about the religion. To learn the truth about Mountain Meadows, I'd recommend watching this video at the Scripture Central YouTube channel.
I could literally write Jasmine. I seriously wonder if her reviews here are written by AI, because every single video or show that portrays Latter-day Saints in any negative light, that's just stereotyping. You got to learn the real truth from her and her Scripture Plus app. Be sure to download, man. I love me some Jasmine. There's no doubt about it. Okay, Britt says, okay, but they did kill over 120 innocent men, women, and children and tried to make it look like Native Americans did it to hide their sins. Yes, the Mountain Meadows Massacre is one of the most horrifying aspects of Mormon history, and there's no doubt about that. And Caitlin says, welcome to the program. Apologists only care about harmful stereotypes when it involves Mormons. You betcha.
The Mormon...
Sorry, I got some transition issues here.
The Mormon...
that I got to get over here. How about one more take about American Primeval as well? We're going to give you 3 takes on it tonight. We're going into extra innings here. I'm by myself, so I need some of my peeps here. What can I tell you? Here we go.
I think he's willing to put himself in dangerous situations because he believes so much in his faith. And he's willing to put himself in danger for himself and his fellow Mormons and his wife.
War in this territory. These natives here don't murder you. You got the Wasatch Mountain Range. Grizzlies, wolves, riled up Mormons.
We are the chosen!
Why this particular time period with the Mountain Meadows Massacre is the sort of inciting incident for the show?
Mark L. Smith and I, there were 2 kind of things that we were talking about. And one was just sort of the nature of violence as we were watching it unfold in the world today. We just keep repeating the same thing, and we can't seem to stop it. We were also big fans of historical period pieces. And there's a movie called Jeremiah Johnson that we both loved that Robert Redford was in. And we were interested in that genre and that period of time. That led us to 1857, the Mormon Meadows Massacre, which was a horrific massacre of about 150 travelers in southern Utah. And we thought that would give us the necessary inciting incident to kind of give birth to the entire series.
Jacob is a Mormon on his way to Utah as Brigham Young has kind of started to create this oasis, this safe haven for Mormons in Salt Lake City. He's traveling with a group of fellow Mormons and his newly wedded wife, Abish. And there's a massacre on his people. Pretty much everyone is killed. Jacob is partially scalped, survives, and for the rest of the series goes on this journey to avenge this massacre on his people, to try to find his wife that he's convinced is alive.
Abish is a young woman who is unapologetically searching for her freedom. You meet her as a pious Mormon wife. She gets captured and taken by the Wolf Clan, who's a splintered off Shoshone group. And she basically gets given a new lease on life. She faces brutality and finds a new spirituality in herself.
Dane, what do you think scares Jacob more, like the violence of the frontier or a crisis of his faith?
I don't think Jacob operates from a place of fear. I think he's willing to put himself in dangerous situations because he believes so much in his faith. I think he doesn't see his faith as a crisis. He sees it as something that is important to him and that he was chosen for and that he was meant to make this journey. I think that, and he's willing to put himself in danger for himself and his fellow Mormons and his wife. And I think his faith is always his guiding light in this entire story. Through all the tough times he goes through, he always has faith that he's going to find his Abish and things are going to be okay.
What can you tell us about your character, Red Feather? What did you draw on to play him?
Definitely the rawness, the realness, and the truth that's going to be spoken about the situation that went on there, kind of based loosely off the Meadows Massacre.
What was life like for the tribes in this time period? And can you talk a little bit about showing different tribes and not a monolith of Indigenous cultures?
All tribes, we were surviving. We were surviving, really trying to come to terms with, this colonization and this life that's coming in and being forced on us and where we fit. Where are we going to fit in that? I was able to go in those different nations that are involved in the story, the Southern Paiute, Ute, and Shoshone, and bring in their historians that could really look at set and look at prop and all the different things and costume. Once you start engaging Native nations into helping to tell and give feedback on their own histories, that is when you really find a richness of the culture that adds to the information and the accuracy that I'm providing to the director to build his story.
Will cleanse and purify the world.
American Primeval is breathtaking.
It shows our brave and strong spirit.
Let me tell you the God will strike you down.
Wow, that looks absolutely fascinating. That clip was amazing, by the way. It had the actors and everybody who's involved. I'll be honest with you, I didn't watch it in advance here. I didn't prepare as well for this episode as I could have, but this looks amazing. Maybe I will do the watch party. So the way that a watch party works, the only way that you can do it on YouTube is if we have a countdown timer and you bring up your Netflix on your own computer or whatever else device, and we just have the live chat that's open on this channel, and we all have to synchronize it at the same time. And so you're watching it on your device, and then the live chat is open to the side. That's the only way it can be done. We obviously can't stream a Netflix, or I'm going to get a copyright strike. Let's catch up with a couple of the comments. First of all, I forgot to read. I forgot to read the results of our poll for how much money should be spent to renovate the Salt Lake Temple. Your choices were $0, which was the majority of you said. 44% said don't spend 1 penny to renovate the Salt Lake City Temple. Whatever it takes is 22%. 2 bits, shaving a haircut, 2 bits, 25 cents, 66%. And sky's the limit. That's 66%. Thanks so much for voting. Now, the next poll question here, which I'm going to end as well, is American Primeval actually accurate? 35% of you said yes. 35% of you said only if Jasmine okays it, and 29% said no. Jasmine is definitely living rent-free on this podcast, and I do appreciate her content. That's great. A couple of the comments here. Let's see. It's Britty has caught up. I already watched the show. She says it starts with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, but it's more about the Utah War and how the West was, the challenges between everyone living there at the time. Yes, I'm definitely going to need to watch it. And Britt also says the series isn't historically accurate, but when you watch, you start Googling and learning so much. That sounds great. I am absolutely hyped. I think others will like it as well. The more you learn, the less likely you're let to let the missionaries in. Britt, I don't know if you've ever been on this channel before, but I really like the way that you think.
I think he's willing.
Sorry, I really like the way that you think here. I've got to do a better job of transitioning between these here, so I apologize for that.
Himself in.
Let me pull this up here. Sorry, Bush League. Okay. I appreciate that. Let me see if there's any other comments I need to catch up with here real quick here in the comments. Yeah, I do like how they had some indigenous people playing the particular parts. I think that was really cool. I like the Brigham Young character as well. He looked a lot like Brigham Young. The action scenes seemed really good. A lot of blood and gore here. I don't like scary movies. I'm kind of a weakling in that regard. You can just Bruce definitely knows that. He knows how weak I am. Shout out to Bruce. Thanks for dropping by the way. Let's see what else do we have. It's not songs. It's not supposed to be a documentary, but some of the major events are accurate. Some artistic licenses taken with the films. That's fine. I'm cool with that. I like a good story here. Brett, yeah, you're new here. You'll be sticking around. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's see what else. Learning songs here. Learning about the story is important, especially since we were told lies about it. Yeah, fed mountains of lies about church history, gaslit for a long time. It's kind of fun to go back and actually relearn what actually happened. Now, I don't know if American Primeval is going to give you God's own truth, but it will be nice to see the perspective. I'm definitely going to get into it. Anyway, so let's see here. Now, a couple of other news articles this week. The church released a survey that they brought out here from the Correlation Research Division. I did an entire episode on this, which I am not going to play for you at this time. It is a 20-minute episode where I actually take the survey, go through it. The church is very interested in, in education of women. It's very interested in polygamy. It's very interested in the premortal life and racism. It's interested in so many things. You should watch the full episode. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of it for you here, which is my final thoughts and conclusions. But if you want to watch me take the survey, which, by the way, now is closed, you can definitely check this out. And I did it all in 21 minutes, which I thought was a really, really good episode, which is why it has at least 17 views, most of which are Chinese bots. Let's see the conclusion of this survey. Well, there you have it, folks. Taking Mormon church surveys. How do you think I did? Leave me a comment down below. I'd be very grateful for your feedback. You can tune in to the Mormon News Roundup on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram and on YouTube. If you feel like making a donation to my efforts here, you can visit me on Patreon. Some final thoughts about this survey. It's interesting to see what the church is interested in. Polygamy still seems to be a huge topic within the church. You know, there was a survey that came out a couple of months ago that says that in the United States in particular, up to a third of people still think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints practices polygamy. This is a huge skeleton in the church's closet. In fact, just a short time ago, the church released a set of cartoons aimed at teaching polygamy to children. I did a review of those incredibly reprehensible cartoons right here that you should really check out. But this survey confirms that the church is still very interested in the ramifications of polygamy. In my opinion, the best thing to do with polygamy would be to decanonize Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, apologize for the absolute barbarism of polygamy, and leave it behind in the dustbin of history. And as I mentioned quite a bit throughout the survey, the church didn't define any of the terms that we're talking about. I don't know what God we're talking about. I don't know what a spirit is. I don't know what sin is. I don't know what any of these terms are. The church just assumes that we're all on the same sheet of music with regards to all of these metaphysical jargon. That's simply not the case. And of course, it's always amusing to have a church that claims modern revelation, but hasn't produced any revelations in over 100 years. Instead, what we get are church surveys, which seem to influence church leaders rather than any supernatural connection. That's quite ironic, isn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on another episode of the Mormon News Roundup. Always think celestial, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing.
I'm a diddly whack Mac Mormon daddy. Yo, my peeps all be conforming cause it's cool to be a Mormon. I'm the blackjack saint on a crack daddy. Oh. I'm the diddly whack Mac Mormon daddy. And I'm spiritual.
Oh boy.
Here? It's over. Go home. Go.
That was a very, very solid review out there, folks. You should really check it out here. I got to be able to go in between these without having a issue here. How do you go on to the next one? Maven, you got to help me out here. I don't know how to go to the next one without having an issue here. Let's catch up with some of the comments here. Uh, Maven said it didn't even have options to give feedback after each question for people to explain why. I was able to send one small sentence to the end of the survey crew, and the sentence for the feedback I gave to them was, "No unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing." Okay, let's see here. We got to get you out of here, folks. Let me just keep going here. A couple last things to take us out here. I didn't realize that this episode would go so long. First of all, if you're not following me on Instagram, you're really missing out, because I finally went global on Instagram. It was pretty remarkable this last week. My views went up by 200%, and I got 200,000 views on Instagram in just this last month. You know, it's crazy that, pardon me, I've been posting on Instagram now for a long time, and then just all of a sudden I just caught fire on it. It's absolutely insane with 90,000 accounts reached, and it went up 20,000. It's hard to say, but if you're not following the Mormon News Roundup on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we are on X, we are on Facebook, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, you are certainly missing out. Now, as far as, that post here, I said we're going viral here. Come and see. This is what I posted on YouTube. Have you checked out the Mormon News Roundup on Instagram? We're absolutely blowing up over there with a 20,000 growth rate, 200K views in the last 30 days. Come and see what all the hype is about. Join the conversation. Good post, if I don't say so myself. And I also got this post on Instagram this last week. I'm just going to share this one thing, which is really, really interesting. Somebody posted, "Because of your videos and podcast, I have decided to leave the church. Thank you for opening my eyes." Wow, that was interesting. That was an interesting message. This is how I responded to that individual. Wow, I really don't know what to say. I honestly don't. I wish you the very best in your journey of life. Leaving the church can be quite traumatic, and I've seen it firsthand how isolating and painful it can be. There may be dark days ahead, days where you question everything you've known, but trust me when I say this, your path forward doesn't need to be walked alone. It's okay to grieve, to struggle, but there's also room for healing, growth, and new perspectives. I genuinely hope you find peace and strength as you continue to move forward. And Maven says, "Congratulations. It's not well deserved, but I appreciate the sentiment." And Britt says, "You converted one." Maybe I did. Now, I also I have a series that's going on here called This Week in Ex-Mormonism, by the way, which is a long series on my channel where I post complete anthologies of people's content. This last Saturday, I posted the first half of Ryan Josiah's content, 6.5 hours of content. Now, since I've been doing this particular series, I now know who are the most prolific ex-Mormons on the planet. And I can tell you that there is one person that I believe stands alone at the top of ex-Mormon content on TikTok, and that is Ryan Josiah. He has over 13 hours of total TikTok content. As far as I know, that is the tip of the top. If you are not subscribed to Ryan Josiah, you are really missing out. This man is so empathetic. He is so smart. He knows his history. He knows his current events. He is fantastic. I've had him on Real Talk Mormonism, and I've also had him as a co-host a couple of times on the Mormon News Roundup. There is no one who knows the church better than Ryan Josiah, and he will deliver you God's own truth. So that's very interesting. Be sure to check out my series, This Week in Ex-Mormonism. We release new episodes every single Saturday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This next Saturday, we will release part 2 of Ryan Josiah's complete anthology. You don't want to miss it. Now, tomorrow, one of my absolutely favorite movies. Of course, we got the Mormon movie reviews every Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We walk back through history and review an old Mormon movie, typically a church-produced, officially produced film. And this Walk in Their Shoes is such a film produced by the Brigham Young University Motion Picture Studio in 1969. This film, folks, is really, really a must-see. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, it is highly entertaining. But second of all, this is the only Mormon movie in the world where a woman is physically abused by a man. And there's no repercussions for the man. He literally assaults a 14-year-old girl in this film because she did a bad thing. And the filmmakers decide that that was an appropriate thing. It's not like he assaulted her and he was reprimanded. No, this 14-year-old girl in Walk in Their Shoes, She was not listening to her brother, so he hit her, and that was her punishment. This is in a church official movie, folks. 1968. You need to watch this film. It's very, very important to walk back through these church films. I'm telling you. Let's see here. We're about ready to wrap up here. Maven, it was an ex-Mo Reddit comment from a man who was out and wife was on her way, but something I said made it click for her. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Now, I want to thank our subscribers here on YouTube. Really want to appreciate those. We have a number of tier options. If you want to support this podcast, I would be very grateful for that. And on the top left, we have the Mormon News Roundup groupies on YouTube. And I want to thank them very much. I really appreciate that. We have Starla, Jeffrey, Garrick, Emrak, Dave, and Lee. Thanks so much for your support. It means the world to me. And over on the right, we do have our Patreon supporters, which are really helpful as well. We have Royce, we have RMW, we have Elizabeth, Carol, David, Blaine, Brent, Colette, Michael, and a special thanks to Sophronia as a general authority Patreon. I could not do this film without her. And Maven, like you said, yes, Maven, walk in our shoes. This is an official church movie. Yeah. And songs. That's how it works. It is very disturbing. That movie is really something. By the way, in that movie, she's also basically groped by another man. This movie is highly disturbing. She is basically groped by an older man. She's a 14-year-old girl. This is an insane movie that you really need to watch. And I am the only person on earth who covers the Mormon movie reviews. I have 200 reviews. No one's even close. So this is why I was covered in the Religion News Service. This is why I was covered on the Salt Lake Tribune, is because I really feel like these movies, I might know them best out of anybody. Anyway, you really don't want to miss tomorrow night. That's for sure here. Yeah, I don't think you've seen this. Let's see here. As this needs to be said, hey, thanks for joining the program. Most things from 1968 would not be accepted today, including slapping a woman. I definitely understand that. But that doesn't excuse the behavior, because all of these church movies were sworn off by general authorities. These went all the way to the top before they were approved. Some general authority, some prophet, seer, and revelator thought that it would be a good idea for a 14-year-old girl who disobeyed her brother to get slapped. And for that to be her punishment, not that he messed up, not that he had to repent for that, but that would be acceptable as a punishment. Okay, this is just one more example of the brain rot, quite frankly, of Mormonism. Thank you so much, folks, for dropping by. This was a long stream. Really appreciate it. We had a good turnout tonight. We release new content on the Mormon News Roundup every single day. Now, it has been, we're coming up on a year where I have not missed one single day where I have not released a video. We release a video at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we release 2 shorts every single day, one at noon and one at midnight. I release 100 videos a month. If you like Mormon ex-Mormon content, you will not find more content than you will right here on the Mormon News Roundup. Always think celestial, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop the Mormon News Roundup from progressing. So long. I got to figure out how to get us out of here. Oh, this is embarrassing. There we go.